I think we should get straight to it, and let's start at the beginning of your career. And I'd like to know how your meteoric rise happened, how you became a managing director at Lehman Brothers at the age of 31.
Well, hello everybody, thanks for being here. At that point there was really very much of an apprentice kind of approach, and it was the first time that my class in 1972 was the first class of MBAs that went to Lehman Brothers. And so there were very few people there, and a good deal of business. And so I found it to be a great place because we had a ratio of only one partner to one associate. So you had to do everything because the partners didn't like doing a lot. So it was a forced learning experience and a really good one. And I got very lucky on one large project, and I was working as an associate someplace in Chicago, and I got a phone call on a Friday night from the head of a company that I had met once called Tropicana, which in the United States is an orange juice company. And he asked me if I would come to Florida Friday night because they were having a board meeting Saturday morning and to sell their company. And he wanted me to represent them on the sale. And there was only one problem. I had never done a merger or acquisition in my life. So this is what you call a high stress moment. And so I flew down there, and there was a big snowstorm. So I didn't get in until around 5 in the morning, and I wasn't expecting to be overnight, so I had no clothes other than the same clothes I was wearing. And I had to be at the company at 7:30, and they gave me 3 different structures. It ended up being the second biggest deal in the world, and I was just alone. And I was scared out of my mind because there's legal liability. I also was like making it up. And it was also a consumer product that everybody in America knew. So if you messed it up, they'd all know that too. So I learned that the phone is almost always on the wife's side of the bed, because I started calling the senior partners as fast as I could to say, help, I've got a few options, what do you think I should do? I'd never been to a board meeting before, so there were all these grown-ups there, and they had 2 tape recorders and a stenographer taking down everything I said, and we got the thing done somehow. And as I say, it was the second biggest deal in the world, and I wasn't a partner. I was just sort of a worker. So that was sort of, I guess what you'd say, was a bit of a breakout moment for me.
So moving beyond your time at Lehman Brothers, I'm wondering what the motivation was for you to go it alone and in partnership with Peter and to set up your own firm. Where did that motivation come from?
Well, the motivation came from the fact that when Lehman Brothers was blowing up, I saw a lot of behavior that I didn't like. The firm was founded in 1850. You could have saved it when it had some big losses. And the people who were 10 years from me, older than me, were not interested in saving the firm. They just didn't want to get fired and take on the management that had mismanaged the business. And I thought I knew what needed to be done, and nobody wanted to do it. They were not brave. And so I ended up selling the business to American Express Company. And I didn't want to be with the people who I thought didn't defend the organization. It was sort of a moral position. And so decided to go out and do something with my partner who'd been thrown out the year before by the management that went in and ultimately blew up the company.
And did you ever imagine you'd be so successful?
Well, I didn't think about it like that. When we started the business, there were very few investment banking firms when I went into that field. And we had a very big footprint. And I just loved the activity and the interesting things that were going on. So when we started our firm, I wanted to repeat that same feeling, but do it without all the people. Just like only do the most profitable things and do something that was global, where you had a lot of feeds, a lot of things that were always going on. And that's what we did. I never really had an expectation of what size would be and all that kind of stuff. I always just wanted to do great things, and as many of them as you could, and the rest of it falls out of that.
And yesterday we hosted Treasury Secretary Jack Lew, as we discussed, and in between his time in the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, he was COO of Citigroup. And I'm wondering what you make of the revolving door between Washington and Wall Street, particularly as your partner in founding Blackstone had been the Secretary of Commerce.
Well, when I was the age of the people in this room, it was very normal to have people from the business world go into government and come back. In World War II, for example, there were a lot of business people that went into the US government. They were called dollar a year people. And that occurred also during the Depression, where successful people would go and work for the government for no compensation just to help out. And that situation was quite normal. And in fact, when I was in college, that was sort of a model that I thought I'd do at some point, because that's what was expected. Now that sort of has some kind of a taint, which strikes me as odd, since most of my life it didn't have that.
So what do you think the sort of trigger was when that taint came into play?
I think it's more along with general populism and unhappiness.
Interesting, because one of the main things Secretary Lew spoke about was populism. So interesting that you're in agreement there. Now, when I was doing some research, I came across a few quotations, and my favorite one is one I'm about to read you, and I'd like to ask you a question about it. And it's describing your view of the financial markets, and you say, "I want war, not a series of skirmishes. I always think about what will kill off the other bidder." So I'm wondering, how do you kill off the other bidder?
Well, that was the most unfortunate quote.
I think it's great.
And it's been cited before. And what that was is you can just tactically, if you go to an auction to buy paintings, sometimes there are bids that go up by almost nothing. So somebody bids $10,000 and somebody says 10-1 or 10-2 or 10-3. And what I was referring to there is if you say 15,000, that usually shuts the thing down. It usually gets up pretty close to there. But just psychologically, at some point, there are different ways to play a situation. And when you do something that's surprising, sometimes it allows you to end up winning at a price that sometimes is lower than where you would have gotten to in some other way. So that's really all it is, just a tactical description.
Sounds a lot tamer than killing.
Yeah, well, you can't do that. They always come back.
Yeah. So on the point of your success in negotiation in business, Forbes 400 gives you a self-made score of 8 out of 10, which is quite impressive. Do you think it's still possible in America's current socio-economic climate, for a smart son of a dry goods retailer to become a billionaire?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have a really pretty remarkable system in America. We have, if you look, for example, just in the tech area, I was at Stanford, I guess it was about a year ago, talking to a group like this, and to me, it sort of seemed that everybody was sitting down playing with their laptop, and I basically stopped the discussion. I said, all you people feel you're going to be billionaires 2 years out of school, and you could see, yes, and they have smart students out there, and America has always been a country where there's been a real entrepreneurial spirit. If you look on the continent here, failure has terrible consequences, and people tend to be very orderly and buttoned up and relatively cautious compared to in the States, where if you have a really great idea and it's totally logical, you're encouraged to go out and do it. If it fails, as long as it fails for some sensible reason that you couldn't have anticipated, then it's sort of like, okay, get yourself up, do it again. In Texas, where I was 2 weeks ago, almost every affluent person in the oil and gas business at some point was broke, because they're looking for something underground that you can't really see. So you have, sort of machinery and all kinds of other things, but that's not the same as knowing what's there. And so there's enormous sympathy for trying sensibly, not having it work, try it again. And America's quite tolerant. I'd say it's probably the most tolerant country that I've visited or lived in for that type of behavior. And so, yes, I would say that, it's definitely possible for people from all backgrounds to become successful. It is really helpful to have a great education, which you all here at Oxford are doing. But people without that kind of high quality education in a globalized world really don't have as much of an opportunity as people who have terrific educations.
So we're going to come on to education very shortly, but I just wanted to pick up on one of the things you said, and you sort of implied that failure is a rudimentary part of ambition and innovation. So what was your biggest failure in business, and how did you come back from it?
Well, you don't get to be successful in life without failing. I wish that weren't the case. It's better to be winning all the time, but it doesn't work that way. So my probably biggest failure came early, and if you're an entrepreneur, which is sort of what I am emotionally, having big failures early can actually be fatal. You want to avoid those if at all possible. And in my case, what happened is it was the third investment that we made, and we didn't have any processes. People would just walk up to my desk and say, I like this, and I sort of thought I was a little like King Solomon, okay, do we split that in half, or what do we do? And so I had a case where I could choose between two individuals and their views on an investment, and I picked the one sitting on my right, who appeared much more knowledgeable, and that was the wrong choice. And we got in a situation where we basically were going to lose all of our money. And I was called by one of our investors to come and see him, and I sat down in a chair in front of his desk, and he started screaming at me. And in my family, nobody ever raised their voice. I thought that was normal. Apparently, that's odd. But in my house, it was normal, so nobody had ever raised their voice. And this man was screaming at me for what seemed like an endless period of time. I mean, and he, he's saying I was unqualified, I was incompetent, I was a moron, probably all of which was true, which was even worse. And I started, my face started getting red, and I thought I was going to start crying. And I was supposed to be in charge of a firm, and I was just totally shamed. And I left that meeting, and I took a ride back to my office. It was about a half an hour ride. And I vowed I was never going to have another meeting like that in my life. We were never going to lose money again. We had to set up different processes, and we did. And the result of that is one of the best investment firms in the world. Certainly, the largest in our class and all that type of, good stuff. But it all stemmed from this one miserable thing. And at that time, as mementos from transactions, they had what were called tombstones, where there were basically lucite cubes, and you had something inside of it, describing the deal. Company A, buys company B, or this company goes public, or something like that. And so I had a special tombstone made up for that deal. It was called Edgecombe Steel, and I did it in the form of an actual tombstone. And inside it, I had a black, sort of background with some white letters. And I kept it on my desk for several decades. So despite all the successes we have, I'd never forget that one. And it's still in my bookcase 30 years later. So you find that adapting from bad things that happen is really the mark of what it takes to become successful, because bad things can take you down, or learning from those things makes you much more adaptable and stronger, and come up with new processes and approaches that protect you from whatever mistakes you made the first time.
As a result of that business success, you've been able to amass quite a very large personal wealth. How do you ensure that doesn't become a distraction? How do you stay focused on work when you're in possession of so much money?
Well, first of all, you have to be aware it could always go away. So it came, it can disappear. And the only reason it came is because everything you focus on must be perfectly done. And as you get bigger, you can never forget that. And so I believe that we're sort of like a restaurant, and we're only as good as our last meal. And if you poison your customer with a really bad meal, even if you're a famous restaurant, you won't go back to that restaurant for quite a long time. If you poison your customer twice, they never come back. And so finance has more fragility involved with it. And so every time we make a decision, it's like a complete life and death situation, and we must do it well. And so I don't really think about the financial consequences to myself. I'm just thinking about, how do we do something that's marvelous? How do we be the best in the world at what we do? And if we do that all the time, what happens is there are good things happen to you personally, but you don't think about it, because once you have your basic things in your life, your house or houses or cars or whatever they are, the rest of it is, the more you accumulate, you're going to have to give it away one way or another, and so that becomes a different phase in your life.
So on that point of giving it away, what led you to create the Schwarzman Scholars, and why choose to put your money into that as opposed to something different?
Yeah, that's a good one. I really enjoy this one. I started a program with some of my colleagues who were sitting in the first row. This is it's a program like the Rhodes, but instead of sending, sort of similar kind of, future leaders and people of potential influence to Oxford, we're sending them to Tsinghua University in Beijing, to Schwarzman College, as Schwarzman Scholars. So why did we do this? And part of it is a story. When our firm went public in 2007, the Chinese government showed up without us asking them to and offered us $3 billion in what was a $4 billion IPO. So for those of you who aren't financial people, when somebody shows up to buy 3/4 of an offering, it sort of says, why do you need the offering? And so we made it $7 billion, and it was the second biggest of the decade, first decade of this century, second to Google, that was larger than ours. I went on the board at the request of the government to Tsinghua University at their business school. It's called School of Economics and Management, and they have an advisory board there that's really amazing. And they have many, many people from the government, and they have famous people from the business world. So, for example, right now we have, just in the tech business, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, Tim Cook from Apple, Jack Ma from Alibaba, Pony Ma from Tencent, which is WeChat there, which everybody uses, Robin Li from Baidu. So if you listed your top 5 people in the world, most of these people would be on that list. And so it's a fascinating group of people. And they were doing a fundraising for their 100th anniversary, so they came to me in the midst of the financial crisis, and I told them I had something better to focus on, like the financial crisis. They should go away. And they changed presidents in the normal rotation, and I was living in Paris for 6 months with my wife, and he came to see me and basically said, we'd like you to do something significant. I had thought about what problems interest me, not what their needs are. That's something as advice I would give you. You think about what interests you, not what interests somebody else. And what interested me was the increasing prominence, power, and scale of China, and the fact that I could see the beginnings of populism occurring, and that meant that people in society, led by leaders who benefit from it, start getting angry at somebody because they're frustrated. They could be legitimately frustrated in their lives, but I felt that after they go after income inequality and wealthy people and people in finance and other types of people, they'd start running out of targets, and then eventually they'd go after countries. And one of the countries that I thought would be one of the first on the list would be China, because of globalization and the fact that there's a professor at Harvard, Graham Allison, who did a study that when you have a challenger country, the world order, challenging the incumbent, China is the challenger number 2 economy in the world, challenging the incumbent, which is the US. Since the year 1500, in 75% of those cases, there's been wars between the challengers and the incumbents. And so I looked at that and I saw this trend coming, and I said, I really want to do something to get in the way of that trend, to try and change outcomes. Because in the modern world, you can't have military conflict between 2 giant countries like this. And so I figured if we could attract, sort of an amazing group of people and send them to China for a year to learn uniquely about China, meet the leaders of the country, go on trips and learn about other parts of the country besides just Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong. If you had a mentor from the real world who was a famous person in your area of interest, lived at Chenhua, met all the students there, that if you could have these unusual experiences, that, for example, we arranged for President George W. Bush to do an interactive video with the students their second week there. That was a lot of fun, actually. I was tuned in secretly on my iPad, and George was very relaxed and candid, and we have a variety of really unique type of opportunities that when these students graduate and go back to their own countries, that we're trying to select them to be leaders and people of influence in their fields. And they'll set up a network among themselves and between them and their Chinese cohort that will allow them to interpret what China's doing. Sometimes China will be doing some things that are destructive of China's relationship and not even know it, and feed that back. Sometimes the rest of the world will overreact to something that China's doing, and they need just sort of more rationality. And so this group will provide that role, and also in terms of being a network that's ongoing, could affect other important issues. And so that's why I did it.
Okay. And by 2030, the website points out, the Schwarzman Scholar website, points out that China will be home to 1 out of every 6 people in the world. It will boast 17 of the 50 largest cities in the world, and it will have more college graduates than the entire US workforce. Now, all of this is in a context of repressive governance and other human rights abuses. Should the US not be incredibly fearful of China's rise?
Well, I think you have to look at this historically. Historically, I mean, China's over 5,000 years old, and as best as academics can put records together, they've had about 20 to 25% of global GDP during that period on average. The low point was in the late 1970s when they had the Cultural Revolution, and their GDP was about 2%. So they were going to be growing 10 times from there as soon as they could get their government straightened out. So I look at China's growth as really sort of somewhat inevitable, and China taking its normal place in the world. They tend not to be an expansionistic country because they're so big already. And I think the world's going to accommodate to that growth and accommodate to a second global power. And it's a question of how you work together productively. So, for example, on the COP21 environmental thing, the two basic leaders were China and the United States. If China hadn't signed on for that, you wouldn't have this environmental framework now. And so I think there's a lot of area for common goals, and this is going to happen. So the idea of being scared about it, usually when things happen, you're supposed to engage and have it come out to be like a win-win situation rather than driving people into corners where they overreact and you get like bad outcomes.
Thanks. We're now going to go to the audience for some questions. Let's go to the gentleman in the front row over there. Yeah, red shirt, or jacket.
So obviously you've had a lot of experience with mergers and acquisitions, so I was wondering if you could take us through, let's say, the steps in the process of a merger and acquisition, and what priorities you hold in mind at each step in the process.
What are the priorities?
Yeah.
Well, the priorities is make the thing work. So the reason you buy a company, you can do it two ways, basically. You can buy it with an existing company you own, in which case you're interested in seeing what kind of synergies there are, both for growing the company faster or eliminating duplicate functions. In other words, making the company more efficient. When you buy a company just freestanding, you're looking at the same factors, but it's a little simpler because you don't have another company you're dealing with at the same time. And when we analyze things, we only want to buy something if we can make it much better. To buy something just to have it, that's like going into a retail store, right? You buy at retail and then you try and sell it to somebody, there's always a loss. You try that sometimes with jewelry. What you want to do is transform a business, make it better, have it grow faster. What happens is the faster a business grows, the more somebody's willing to pay you when you sell it, whether you take it public or whether you sell it to somebody else. It also has some other really good characteristics for society. The faster you grow a company, the more people you inevitably need to employ. And so they get paid more, and then that's a good thing. So the key is when you buy something, how can you make it better? So we do big studies, and we do it before we buy the company. Buying a company isn't supposed to be an adventure. You're supposed to take as much as the adventure out of it, because there's always enough adventure anyhow, because you never really know as much as you think. But you're trying to make this as riskless an operation as you can. So on a normal thing, we have at least 1 or 2 consulting firms working with us to see how you can introduce new products, how you can grow faster. We have all kinds of experts. And so, whether you can save money on their insurance or combine it. We have a group buying program that we use at the firm so that when we buy the exact same thing for a company, we add it to the other companies we have. So we have greater buying power, so we could buy that cheaper. We have all kinds of ways that we analyze. At the end of the day, you sit around and figure out, one, can we ever lose money by buying this company? That's the first thing you have to do. And if you could lose money with any realistic set of scenarios, you never do it, even to make a lot. I mean, making a lot is fun, but losing your money is dreadful. So you never put yourself in that position, knowingly. You've got to be very tough on that. And then you execute the plan after you buy it. And that's how we do things. And it tends to work out right, somewhere around 93% of the time. If you buy stocks, it tends to work out right if you're good 55% of the time. So I'd rather be sort of hitting in the 90s than a little bit more than flipping coins.
Another question, please. If we go to the gentleman standing up over there.
There's an amazing story about you that I'm going to get completely wrong, about how you got your first job. Something like you couldn't get a job, so you started working at the Yale alumni office. And one day there was a family having a picnic, and you managed to start talking to the family having the picnic. And from there, somehow you landed yourself up in an interview, I believe it was at DLJ. And when the guy asked you, so what do you do or why do you want this job? You said, well, I have no idea what you do, but everyone seems so excited, I really want to be a part of it. My question is, you probably hear all the time from people who are about the age in this room, how hard it is to get a job these days and get a first job and this sort of thing. And you talked about failure. So I really just had a simple question, which was, were there other families through the Yale alumni office that you had approached, that you had met in other ways, that you hadn't had the same luck with before you hit gold with the interview you did get?
Well, he's telling a story which is actually, it was a funny thing. I was working at a Yale reunion because I had no plans after graduating. I mean, this is actually pretty pathetic when you think about it. And so I was just working to get some money. because I forget what they were paying, like $30 for 2 or 3 days, which was like 30 more than I had. And so I was working at a 15th reunion. These were old people. They graduated for 15 years. So they were 37, and they were old. And they had children, so a lot of them. And there was a family just sitting, having, sort of a lunch on the lawn. And I looked at the family. It seemed like an ideal family. And I went out and to a bookstore, and I bought Babar the Elephant, which is a children's book that my father used to read to me at night. And so I just went over and I handed it to this family, and I said, I just want you to have this book. And the 4 of them looked up at me like, who is this person? I thought that's a pretty legitimate thing for them to do. And I just gave them the book. They said, why are you giving me a book? I said, because you look like just such happy people that I just wanted you to have the book. And then I walked away. And the father came after me and he said, that was one of the nicest things that anybody's ever done. I said, well, thanks. He said, well, what are you doing after graduation? I said, I have no idea. He said, well, the reunion ends in another day. This isn't much of a career. He said, look, I work at the Yale admissions office, and why don't you come and see me? And so I saw him 2 days later, and he said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, look, I've got some friends who are my age, 37, they're old, and I'll introduce you to some of them. And so I bought my first suit, and I went down to New York to meet some of his friends. And I had never been in an office building before. And the first person I met was the vice chairman of a big bank. It was pretty weird. He went up this elevator, very high, and they had wide halls with white carpet. I couldn't imagine a business would have white carpet. And I walked down, there were like policemen there. I mean, I don't know why they had guards. They're up on like the 48th floor. And who was going to do? Superman was going to fly in and give him a problem. And, met with him, and he said, after a while, he said, are you hungry? Well, students are always hungry, right? So he opens this door, and there was a dining room, and with a man with a white coat. And I couldn't believe any of this was real. And so we were eating, and he said, I'm going to offer you a job at Bankers Trust. I said, well, thank you. And then he said, but I'd advise you not to take it. And I said, why not? He said, you'll be really bored here, and you'll last for a year, and then you'll leave. So don't take the job. So I hadn't had much to do with grown-ups, so I thought this was a little odd, right? The guy's giving me a job, telling me to not take the job he's giving me, and so I went back, saw the other guy, and he said, how did it go? I said, it was a little strange, So he said, okay, here's another one. So I went down to see, the Bill Donaldson at DLJ, who started the Yale, they call it Yale School of Organization and Management, it's Yale Business School. And so I didn't know what he was doing either. But, he had like a great looking group of people there. They were all excited, and I sat down, and he said, why do you want to work at DLJ? I said, I don't have any idea what DLJ does, but wow, these people here look great, and whatever they're doing, I want to do. This is very scientific interviewing. I advise you not to follow my advice on this. He said, well, that's interesting. So he had me meet all of his partners. I was completely unqualified. I was going into the Army in about 6 months. And they hired me. So he calls me and he said, okay, we're going to offer you a job. It's $10,000. And I had no money. And so I said, that is great. That's wonderful, thank you. But I need 10.5. He said, why do you need 10.5? I said, because I want to be the highest compensated graduate of Yale University. 1969, there's one other person who has 10,000. He said, well, why should I care about that? I said, because I care about it. He said, I don't care that you care about it. This is like 10,000. He said, by the way, in case you haven't realized it, you're basically worthless. I said, yes, I'm aware of that, but I still want 10.5. And he said, are you not going to take this job at 10? I said, no, I'm not going to take it. So he said, listen, let me call you back. So he calls me back next day and he said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but okay, 10.5. and that was the start of my career. So that was just nothing but a reward for being a nice person. In other words, I just did this for Larry Noble, who was the guy with the kids, for no reason, no motives, nothing. Just because emotionally I felt connected to him. And he got me into his network of super achieving people. The person who hired me became Deputy Secretary of State. He started the Yale Business School and was also chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. But I had no access, nothing. You're all better served than I was. They have a career counseling here. My career counseling was nothing.
Another question, please. Yes, the girl on the bench over here.
Hi, my name is Feng. I'm an MBA student. My question is, the financial services industry has changed drastically since post the financial crisis. And what kind of advice would you give us as aspirational leaders?
Financial services industry's gone through a very difficult time under its new regulatory regime. For those who bother to look, they'd find that it's not just the financial system, financial institutions that are having a tough time. It's societies who've re-regulated these institutions. They're having a bad time too. And those two things are linked. And so it's been very fashionable after the financial crisis to take a very harsh regulatory position, which I believe is leading to very slow growth throughout every country that's taken that approach. And at some point that's going to have to be reversed, because certainly in the United States our financial institutions are extremely safe. We've shrunk them. They're way more liquid, but we've minimized the amount of lending that's gotten done, which is one reason why these economies haven't recovered to the extent that they were expected to. So it'll take some time more, not convenient for you at this stage in career, where that will reverse, because we're going to need to get growth back for the benefit of the middle classes and lower income people also in our society. You can't do that without well-functioning financial institutions. But there are always companies that survive that. In the olden days, like when I was your age, you would go to the very largest institutions. They were very prestigious, and you would get trained in a normal apprentice type of approach. That still exists, but there are relatively few of those institutions. There are many more other types of institutions, like we're at Blackstone, we're in the alternative asset management business, which means we do private equity and real estate and hedge funds and leverage credit and some other things. There are other businesses that are smaller than ours that do some of those things, and those are good places to work because they're smaller. They aren't regulated in the same manner as depository taking institutions, where regulators are protecting depositors and consequently control those institutions. Because we don't take deposits from anybody, we raise our money from pension funds and university endowments like Oxford and other types of institutions, sovereign wealth funds, that we have the freedom to do actually what we'd like to do for customers. And there are places like that in the money management business. Interestingly, for those of you who have any mathematical orientation, that the money management business itself is becoming much more quantitative, and that presents all kinds of opportunities in different areas of finance. So, and finance is also starting new things because of technology. This whole fintech area, which is more like venture capital type of opportunities to grow your own things. Finance is a necessary part of a society, and it always evolves, it always changes, and there's always a way to do things. Governments are trying to discourage people from going into finance because they articulate it as being unproductive. That's a political statement, I think. And without finance, you can't grow an economy. And so I think there'll be plenty of opportunities, but it'll be an evolving field.
We have time for a couple more questions. We have the gentleman on the front bench here.
So I was reading an article in Forbes recently about the Schwarzman Scholars, and it said that despite having the support of President Obama and the support of President Xi Jinping, you still came up against some challenges from the Chinese government in founding the program. Could you maybe talk a bit more about those challenges and how you overcame them?
Well, I think he was talking about the Schwarzman Scholars program and what problems we faced. My goodness, whenever you do something that's cross-cultural, that's never been done before, good luck. You're not even aware of all the things you're going to encounter. And the Chinese system is a lot different than, sort of the Anglo-Saxon system. We built a building, and the quality standards typically in China are much below what would be acceptable in the US or the UK. So I would say that was an adventure, and there's so many funny stories with that. You can't believe it. We sent one of our people up into a quarry up in the mountains because we couldn't get the right, sort of stone because somebody shipped it wrong, and this poor guy was a PhD from MIT. He's up in a quarry someplace trying to figure it out. So we had a lot of scrambling that went on with that. We were trying to do a fusion type of teaching with Chinese professors and professors from around the world, and that took like 2.5 years to set up. It's been very successful, but the first few meetings are always, like, what are we all doing here type things. That worked out really nicely. And you know, the whole workings of a bureaucracy in China are much different than here. I mean, you may think you have bureaucracy at Oxford. That's probably not the case. It's just they use their bureaucracy to protect themselves from illegal behavior. And so, you know, the first answer isn't always yes, right? In Anglo-Saxon culture, you know, a lot of times you just present something that's interesting. Somebody says, hey, that's great, let's try that. You know, there's more of a reluctance at the middle levels of their organization to do new things because you can get in real trouble because of all the regulations. The senior people tend to be pretty visionary, and you know, so that doesn't always immediately, you know, translate down. So it's you know, it takes longer to accomplish something in China than it would, you know, in sort of a, you know, Western approach, because you have to keep going back up again if you can't make it through the middle layers. So it takes longer, it takes enormous effort. But when you get it right and you have a whole country behind you, we have support from the president of the country. And that's a big deal in China. Minister of Education, head of the country, head of Tsinghua University, which is, you know, sort of the university that the president of the country went to. The previous president of the country, it's sort of their power alley university. Depends who's ranking them. It's either number 1 or 2 in China. But you do something that's cross-cultural, no matter where it is in the world. If you're out of your native culture, it's more complicated. If you're in a place where, you know, in effect, there, you know, laws are like a creative concept. You know, they don't have rule of law the way we would have rule of law. It can be challenging, but, you know, our first class of students, unbelievable. Unbelievable. We selected amazing students. We have, was it 2, Rob, from Oxford? And we had 3,000 applications, and first class 110. This little group of 110 people, besides being verbal and creative and really super smart, 3 weeks ago I get an email. They just won the track and field championship at Tsinghua University with 30,000 people. There's 110 people. They won the Tsinghua track and field championship. We didn't even select them to be athletes. So this has been so exciting. And, you know, we have this beautiful building, like modeled off of a Oxbridge college, except it's looks like a Chinese Oxbridge, you know, with like the, you know, the peaked roof that slopes and the courtyard, you know, double courtyard like you have, except you got bamboo. You don't have your stuff, but it's designed beautifully, and people are incredibly happy. And you know, it's one of the few things that I've worked on that dramatically exceed expectations. It's one of the top programs in the world, and you know, what's wonderful is I get this steady stream of emails from people having unbelievable experiences. I mean, just off the chart. So sometimes you have to work hard to get something good, but we've done all the work for everybody. So now the people who go can just have a good time and learn uniquely.
Let's go to someone at the back. There's a blue jumper right at the back.
Hi, thanks for coming. So I've been reading that a lot of sources of investment who would normally be giving a lot of their money to private equity firms, such as sovereign wealth funds or big family houses or pensions, are now directly investing by themselves without sort of investing with the private equity firms. I was wondering what you think that means for the private equity landscape. Does it make it stronger, or are they a threat for you guys, or are they potential future allies and co-investment partners?
Yeah, investing isn't totally as simple as what I described to you, or else everybody would be terrific. And most people aren't. I think it's pretty logical, and I can explain it that way. And so there's always shifts in the investment business. Nothing is stable because in the investment area, there are no patents. So if you invent something or think of doing something, you start doing it. Anybody in the world can replicate what you're doing or replicate it with a spin. So you have to constantly be looking for smart ways to do things and understanding that no matter what you did once, somebody's going to show up and play with it in some way. And so the trends keep, sort of modifying. It's evolution, not revolution. And some of the customers become huge, say, well, geez, I don't need these people to do this. I can do this myself. And there have been several periods where that's happened. Usually, it's a mixed outcome, and sometimes misfortune, sort of visits people who do things directly because they can't pay people the same or even close to the same. So if you think there's any correlation between what you pay somebody and what you get, you should get better execution. And so people try to cut cost. You can't blame them, and do things directly. And if that worked out, there'd be more people doing it. It takes usually, sort of 3, 4, 5 years before you have any idea if it's working. And that's about where it started, and we'll see what happens. In a world where 2/3 of the governments have their securities with interest rates below 1%, and about 1/3 of governments have negative interest rates. What that means is you give them your money and then you keep paying them interest. You're paying them interest instead of them giving you something. It's really pretty bizarre, right? So in that kind of world, where last year in the United States, about 80% of the universities lost money in their endowment. The average return for a pension fund was 0 last year. If we can earn double-digit rates of return on a regular basis, and sometimes I think I'm limited by what I'm allowed to say by the SEC, but just take that as a given, that it's a lot more, then for firms like ours, we don't particularly worry about whether a few people do things directly. All we know is if your alternatives are very low rates of return and we do very high, logic would say they'd give you the money to do very high instead of doing very low, right? I realize this is a controversial concept, but that's actually what happens in real life. And so raising money in our position at Blackstone now is radically changed from when I started the business, and people would say, why would I give you any money? You don't know what you're doing. Well, I didn't know what I was doing. It worked out anyhow. But now, after 31 years, you have a long track record, and that builds up a certain level of confidence. And so, if a few customers or relationships drift away, it's such a big world with so much money that, we're more limited by the number of investment opportunities than the amount of money.
Please do remain seated whilst Mr. Schwarzman and I leave, but first and foremost, do join me in thanking him for a splendid event.